afternoon and welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Governance Group. Before we commence with the proceedings, I can confirm that the Council has adopted...
Apologies, Chloe, your microphone has switched off. Could you repeat that paragraph for me, please?
Hello, hear me now? Sorry about that, members. Good afternoon and welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Governance Group. Before we commence with proceedings, I can confirm that the Council has adopted some basic etiquette rules for its remote meetings. For ease, these are as follows. Only speak when the Chairman invites you to do so. Members, please let the Chairman know when you want to speak through the chat function. The Chairman will introduce speakers in the order that the request to speak was made, unless there is a point of order which will be prioritised. Please minimise all distractions whilst you are in the meeting. Members are asked to mute your microphone when you are not speaking and consider turning off your video to reduce interference on the audio feed. Please bear in mind there may be a lag between speaking and other attendees hearing you. Presentations, images or video footage should have been made available to you in advance of the meeting and will be visible on the screen. Please indicate via the chat function if there is a problem. When referring to reports, please quote the page and paragraph number. There is no private business for this afternoon. However, members are reminded that it is their responsibility to make sure that their venue and connection is private. If you lose connection at any point and are unable to immediately rejoin, then please call the meeting facilitator. Contact details have been provided. Please only use the chat function for the purpose prescribed for requesting to speak or for a point of order. The chat function is subject to access of information regimes, FOI and EIR, and is also subject to data protection, rules of defamation and the Council's Code of Conduct. For this meeting, councillors are identified by a prefix of CLLR before their name. There are officers in attendance, they identified with the prefix of officer. There is a minute taker for this meeting and 2 meeting facilitators. I can confirm that this meeting is quorate. The Corporate Governance Groups consist of the following members. Councillors Richard Van Dalken, Councillor Paul Houston, Councillor Hilton Johnson, Councillor David Mann, Councillor Vanessa Santamoro, Councillor Dean Wallace, Councillor Tom Walsh and Councillor Lynn Walters. The officers for this meeting are Kim Cole, Emma Wisby, Salim Chagtai, Chloe Waite. Jess Mann is clerk in the meeting and Chloe Waite and myself and Emma Wisby are the meeting facilitators. I will now hand over to the Chairman, Councillor Richard Van Dalken.
Thank you very much, Chloe, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the virtual meeting of the Corporate Governance Group on a warm afternoon in Braintree. My name is Councillor Richard Van Dalken and I will be chairing the meeting. As you know, the Council is new to virtual meetings, and so I'd ask everyone to be patient and understanding as we feel our way through this new way of working. I'm being assisted by a governance officer and a meeting facilitator who will help me identify when people wish to speak and manage the notifications through the chat function. I obviously can't see all of you, but please let me know using this chat function if there are any issues with your internet connection. Please also remember to mute your microphone when you finish speaking. Members, for this meeting, when and if I seek your agreement, silence will be taken as assent. As the meeting facilitator has confirmed the attendance of members and officers for this meeting, I shall now proceed with the business of the meeting.
Excuse me, Chairman, I do apologise for interrupting you. We didn't actually give apologies and Councillor Walsh has actually joined the meeting as we were starting our facilitating script. Could I kindly ask for Councillor Walsh just to check his connectivity to the meeting so we're satisfied that he's with us this afternoon?
Thank you, Emma. I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you very much, Councillor Walsh. And and Chairman, just to confirm that we've had apologies this afternoon from Councillor Santamoro, Councillor Hume and Councillor Walters. Councillor Walters has given apologies for lateness, so we will hope to have her joining us as soon as possible. Thank you, Chairman, and apologies for interrupting you.
Thank you very much, Emma. So that is agenda item 1, apologies for absence. If there are no more apologies, I'll proceed to item 2, declarations of interest. Do members have any disclosable pecuniary interests, other pecuniary interests, or non-pecuniary interests that they wish to declare this afternoon? Please state the item and the nature of your interest. And if you wish to speak, please mention this in the chat function. I don't see any notifications or declarations, so I'll proceed to item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. Well, here I understand, in fact, that our meeting, which was one of our regular quarterly meetings, it was only a few weeks ago, and I'm looking over here to Emma. I think I was told that the minutes should be available at or before our next meeting anyway.
Indeed, Chairman, we do apologise. We were hopeful that we'd have the minutes ready for the meeting when we publish this agenda, but unfortunately, due to other commitments within the team, we are a little bit behind, but they certainly will be available for the next meeting. So apologies for that for Chairman and members. Thank you.
That's fine. Thank you very much. So I'll move on to item 4, public question time. Well, I don't think we have any registered meeting speakers this afternoon, so we can proceed to item 5. Local Government Association Draft Model Code of Conduct Consultation Response. The reason we're all here this afternoon. Item 5, this report was to follow and was circulated to members last Friday, 7th of August. May I please invite Kim Cole, Head of Governance and Monitoring Officer, to set out the report.
Good afternoon, members. All councils are required to have a local member code of conduct. Braintree District Council adopted their members' code of conduct on the 11th of June 2012, with the last revisions taking place in February 2020. It also forms part of the council's constitution. This same code has been adopted by the council's 52 parishes and 2 town councils situated within the district. In January 2019, the Committee on Standards in Public Life published their report into local government ethical standards. They considered that robust standards arrangements were needed to safeguard local democracy, maintain high standards of conduct, and to protect ethical practice in local government. They made 26 recommendations to government for revision of the current provisions and set out a list of 15 best practice measures. These best practice measures are set out in Appendix B of the report before you. One of the key recommendations was that the Local Government Association produce a model code of conduct in consultation with councillors and other relevant stakeholders. In their view, the principal authorities' codes of conduct, the Standards Committee found that there were considerable variation between authorities' codes in terms of length, breadth, clarity and detail, and were advised that the variations between the codes created confusion, particularly for those members that were dual-hatted and amongst members of the public over what is required of different councillors in different areas and tiers of local government. The LGA held events in civility in public life with a range of stakeholders towards the end of 2019, and 3 consultation workshops were commenced at the beginning of 2020. Their consultants examined examples of good practice both in local government and other professions, the outcome of which resulted in the recommendation that a model code would create consistency across England and reflect the common expectations of the public regardless of tier and geography. Accordingly, the LGA have now launched a consultation on the draft model code, and this is set out in Appendix C of the report before you. The committee today is being asked to consider the draft code and the consultation questions and determine whether the council wishes to respond to the consultation, which closes on the 17th of August, and if so, what its response should be to those questions. All members have been provided with a briefing on the consultation, and their feedback was sought. Where these were received, they have been set out in Appendix E of the report before you. The purpose of this consultation is to obtain the views on the draft code of conduct, and should a model code be launched by the LGA, then at that time the model code will be brought back before this committee for consideration, and recommendation will then be made to full council on whether it should be adopted with or without local amendments. In order to assist members today, a comparison was carried out between the Council's Code of Conduct and the draft code, and this is also set out in Appendix A. In the main, the draft code is broadly in line with the Council's current code and remains based on the 7 principles of public life. The LGA have been very clear that the purpose of the code is to promote high standards and trust with councillors, and to act as a document which sets out the behaviours that members of the public can expect from councillors. LGA workshop feedback highlighted that it was felt it was better for the code to be rules-based, as it was easier to apply, and that short and succinct was preferred. However, they did recognise that there was a need to balance the promoting of positive behaviour and the setting of boundaries. The application of the code has historically gone through changes. The old National Code applied when the member was acting as a councillor or purporting to act as a councillor. This was restricted in 2011 by the Localism Act to only applying when acting in a councillor capacity. The draft model seeks views on whether this should be expanded again to reinstate the old test and include purporting to act. The Standards Committee felt that given members' significant representative role, there should be a rebuttable presumption that a member's behaviour in public is in an official capacity, and that this should include comments made on social media. If this recommendation is brought forward, legislative changes would be required before it could be incorporated into the model code. The code applies to all forms of member communications, interactions, and includes written, verbal, non-verbal, electronic, and via social media. Question 10 of the consultation asks whether there is sufficient reference to the use of social media within the code, or whether there should be an explicit section for this, and whether a social media policy should sit within the code or outside it. The draft code also removes the requirement to treat people with respect by replacing it with the term civility. This is defined within the draft code as meaning politeness and courtesy in behaviour, speech, and in written word. This change has been met with mixed responses on the LGA webinars, and question 7 of the consultation asks whether the council feel this new phrase is sufficiently clear. Further, the draft code also brings in the definition of bullying and harassment, and these provisions extend further to that is currently set out in the current code, as there is no definition of either term and currently requires a more general obligation around these principles. Where members' behaviours are considered dishonest and or deceitful, these can bring the council into disrepute, and the draft code provides a specific obligation around this. Currently, the council's code does not obtain this provision, although this isn't a new concept and one that is set out in other authorities' code of conduct currently. Question 8 of the consultation seeks views on whether this concept is sufficiently clear. Declarations of interest have also been revised. Disclosable pecuniary interests remain the same, and where a member makes a declaration under this, they will be able to continue, or they will continue to be required to leave the room during that section of the meeting and will not be entitled to participate in the debate or vote on that item. The term other pecuniary interests has been removed. Non-pecuniary interests have been replaced by the term other registrable interests. The basis of this interest is no different to that currently set out in paragraph 10.1.2 of the Council's Constitution. However, what is different is that the member disclosing an other registrable interest will only be able to remain in the meeting, participate in the debate and vote if that item is taken in the public section of the meeting. If the item is taken in private, then it will be treated as a DPI and the member will be required to leave in the same way. The LGA are also proposing that all councillors are required to declare interest in the matter that also relate to or affect other family members or associates. Now, this is an expansion of the current provisions, which currently stop at the councillor's partner. Currently, the draft code does not provide a definition on what other family members or associates will include. However, the consultation question does set out a range of categories and seeks feedback on whether the council feels these categories should be captured within the obligations around around interests. The council's gift and hospitality limit is currently set at £50. The model code indicates a value of 25. And again, the consultation seeks views on whether this is an appropriate threshold. The draft code does not provide any strengthening of the sanctions available under the breach of the code, and these remain the same. The draft code is offered as a template for authorities to adopt in whole and/or with local amendments, and the focus of the consultation is to seek views from local authorities, members and officers on whether the draft code stands up to the new ways of working that have been introduced across authorities over recent years, and whether it gives enough of a steer on social media and online activity. Participation in the LGA consultation provides the council with an opportunity to put forward its views on the draft code and for these to be taken into consideration by the LGA at an early stage, and could, if any of the council's points are adopted, mean that there would be limited need to undertake local modifications and would form part of the base draft code to be applicable to neighbouring local authorities. Happy to take any questions, Chairman.
Sorry, Councillor Bendelkin, your microphone is off. Just before you resume, I just want to check that Councillor Ms Waters, your microphone is working as you joined us during Kim's presentation. Can you just do a microphone test for me, please?
I think I'm up and running now, yes.
Lovely, thank you very much. Back to you, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chloe, and thank you, Kim, for an extremely good explanation of your report, which I'm sure members have read along with the other appendices. Now, members, at this moment, the decisions are set out in section 4 of Kim's report, and these being as follows. Number 1, we are asked to consider the LGA consultation and determine whether the council will be providing a response to the consultation questions. Secondly, where a response is to be sent, we're to agree the responses to the consultation questions. And thirdly, we're to agree, if we wish, that the monitoring officer shall submit the council's formal response to the LGA consultation by the closing date on the 17th of August 2020. Do any members wish to speak on this item? If you don't, I'll have a few words to say. Councillor Walsh, please, go ahead. You're muted at the moment. You're muted.
Thank you, Chairman. This is the place to comment on the LGA code, is it not?
Well, I think what I was going to perhaps suggest, and maybe I should have said, was that if we could deal with these 3 questions, and then if we do wish to take it further, then we go through the consultation questions. Does that make sense?
In that spirit,
again, I'll say them very quickly. We are asked to consider the consultation and determine whether the council will be providing a response to the consultation questions. I'll ask at this stage whether there are any members who do not agree that we should provide a response to the consultation questions.
Okay, may I comment briefly?
Yes, Councillor.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Chairman. I think we should comment. I think it's an important document. It's constructive, and I think it it sets a benchmark, arguably a model for behaviour. And I won't say what my specific comments are now, because we need to decide on that first issue. But I'd just like to say I have quite a developed interest in this area. I've helped draw up codes in charities and government bodies, helped to apply them, and commented as a member of the public on the behaviours of organisations that I wasn't part of. But I'll stop there.
Right, thank you very much. Councillor Eusden.
Thank you, Chairman. And just to say that I agree we should respond. It is an important document, and I think it's important that we respond, though I think in many ways our current one is better than the one that's being proposed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Any other comments? I'll just, if not, Councillor Mann.
Councillor Mann, you're muted at the moment. Could you please unmute your microphone for me, please?
Thank you. That would be a good idea. Agree we should most certainly comment. Very important document. Possibly suggesting a rise in standards expected of us, which I think is to be applauded.
Thank you very much, and that's something I echo myself. And so I think unless there are any members that do actively disagree, we will be providing a response to the consultation questions. The second question is where a response is to be sent, agree the responses. Well, let's leave that for 1 second and go on to the third. Agree that the monitoring officer shall submit the council's formal response to the LGA consultation by the closing date of the 17th of August, which is, I guess, is that, sorry? Monday, is it?
That's Monday.
Yes. Well, if she is physically able to do this, then again, I would ask that members, if you don't disagree or if you have any comments on this, please advise. Otherwise, we will ask Kim to make this official response. We have agreement on that then, I think. All right, so I suggest we go back to the responses to the consultation questions, which is the meat of the whole thing. Do members have that available in front of them? It would save me an awful lot of reading out. No? Yes, one member. Okay. Councillor Walters?
Chairman, if it will assist, we're just trying to see if we can share the screen with the relevant questions on to help members.
I think that
as
would
we
be
work
very
through
helpful. Thank you.
Thank
No
you.
problem.
Sorry, I apologise for leaving the meeting for a moment. I have got the agenda in front of me, the whole kit and caboodle.
I'm told we are trying to get it up on the screen. Here we go. Right, thank you very much. That's very helpful. So
Chairman,
question,
sorry,
yes.
Chairman, can I just check, because obviously I'm now got a limited view on my screen, that you can see question 1, is that correct?
Yes, please.
Lovely, thank you. I just need to check because I don't want to scroll prematurely for you. Thank you.
So to what extent do you support the proposal that councillors demonstrate the behaviour set out in the code when they are publicly acting as, identifying as, or giving the impression that they are acting as a councillor, including when representing their council on official business and when using social media? So you've got the 5 choices there. just thinking how we should how we should do this. Does anybody think that they don't prefer, sorry, they don't know or prefer not to say, or not at all? I can't get the chat up here. Right. Is there an agreement that, to a great extent, we would agree with the proposal that councillors demonstrate the proper behaviour set out in the code when they are publicly acting as identifying or give the impression they're acting as a councillor?
Sorry, Chairman, it looks like Councillor Miss Waters has indicated that she would like to speak.
Thank you. Councillor Miss Walters.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Chairman. I personally don't, I use social media like a lot of people. I never tell people I'm a district councillor. They may know I'm a district councillor. Nobody has ever indicated that. And I try very carefully not to be biased on any of these social medias. So I do try very, very hard to keep the two separate. But I think councillors should be responsible for what they say on social media. I feel it's very important because it reflects on a lot of people, particularly the councillors and the counselling as well. So if that, does that make sense to anyone?
It does to me.
Okay.
I think it's an unfortunate, well, not unfortunate, it's a new thing that's come into our lives in the last 10 or 20 years and 10 or 15 years, and previously it was not an issue. So when we are using social media, we are in the public arena. Indeed
it is. I totally agree with you, Chairman. And I think because of that situation now, we have to take this as it is going to be what life is all about now. It's not going to go away, and we have to react accordingly, in my opinion. Thank you very much indeed.
Councillor Walsh has made the good suggestion. I've been floundering around a bit here trying to find a formula that I just go through the options, and if there are any objections, then we can stop. So I think if we start from the top, to a great extent, is that supported by members? And Councillor Mann has his hand up. Yes, Councillor. Oh, you agree? I'm sorry. Okay. So there are no disagreements. I think, Kim, we'll take this after all that to a great extent. And you'll see under their member feedback, that was the same view. Question 1A, if we'd like to elaborate on our answer, please do so here. I hesitate to get too involved in this, otherwise we're going to be here all afternoon. But if there are any serious comments, then please make your presence known. No? So we'll move on to question 2. Is it sufficiently clear which parts of the model code are legal requirements, which are obligations, and which are guidance? So what is the view on yes? And any feel no, that it's not clear which are legal requirements, which are obligations, and which are guidance? The question from Councillor Walsh.
Yeah, thank you. Extremely briefly, to be honest, I'm not entirely clear. I assumed that generally the whole code, if adopted, would be guidance, or is some of it a legal requirement? Perhaps officers could advise us.
Certainly, there are aspects of it which are statutory based, and those I highlighted in my presentation that would need a further legislative change if they were to be brought in. So some of it is guidance and brought around as a result of best practice, but there's also some aspects of it that are statutory requirements as set out in the Localism Act.
I put down no when I did the written version. Are there some members that agree that it is not clear which are obligations, which are legal obligations or requirements, and which are guidance? Councillor Eusden.
Right. I don't think it is particularly clear, but my comment really is, does that matter? Because if we are behaving correctly in accordance with the code, whether it's a legal requirement or guidance shouldn't actually matter that much. It should just be, this is the way you behave and you behave that way. The fact that some bits have the strength of the law behind and others are just guidance, I don't think should make a huge difference to us as individuals. But I may be wrong, of course.
I think that's a very good point, Councillor Eusden. However, at the same time, they're asking for an answer to the question. So shall we say no? Does anybody agree violently with that? We'll take that as a no, Kim. Question 3, do you prefer the use of the personal tense as used in our code, or would you prefer the passive tense? So personal tense, I will. Passive tense, I will. Passive tense, councillors should. No preference. Councillor Walters, you wish to make a comment?
Apologies, Chairman. I'm trying to get to grips with my computer today. It's I don't know whether it's misbehaving or whether it's me misbehaving.
It's the heat. It's the heat. I know.
Well, the heat's definitely done my head in. I think it should be that councillors should behave, and we have to assume that they should behave like that in a particular manner. Is that what you're saying?
No, I think it's more a question of not semantics or grammar. I will, or councillors will or should. That's what they're asking there.
Chairman, if it may help, when members sign their acceptance of office, when you're first elected, when you sign your acceptance of office, it says that you will abide by the obligations under the local government legislation, if I may use that collective term, and the code of conduct. So I think this is about ownership. So as the way that I'm viewing this, as a councillor, would you take more ownership of your behaviours under the code if it's expressed as I will rather than councillor will? I think councillor gives you the objectivity, whereas what we want with any code is that there is ownership of that code by members because you sign up to it,
right?
And this is how you observe. So, like you say, it's a question of semantics, but it's for some members they may take more ownership of that code if it's expressed slightly differently.
Okay. Councillor Mann, you wish to speak?
Now, I agree very much with that view. It's a personal responsibility, being a councillor, and the way we behave is individual and personal to us. We may not be able to influence too much the conduct of other councillors. We hope this code will guide them, but we certainly can be responsible for our own behaviour. Therefore, it should be "I will," in my opinion.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments before I give mine? I think that's most people. I have said, and I think Councillor Walsh as well, said that it should be the passive tense. Councillors should, on the basis that it's more professional. So I think we're kind of split down the middle here, and I'm going to suggest that we don't waste too much time on it, and we go for no preference. Does anybody, sorry, do any members strongly disagree with that, given that we're sort of half and half? No, thank you very much. We'll move on to question 4. This is a long one. To what extent do you support the 12 specific obligations? So treating other councillors and members of the public with civility. Does anybody feel that that should not be to a great extent? I think we'll take that as given. I'd like to add something which perhaps Kim could take a note of, that other people have said this at the seminars, the question of using the word just civility. And I felt the same thing, that it should be civility and respect. Civility can be, you can be civil to someone but not necessarily treat them with respect. This phrase, passive aggressive. Not that I'm suggesting we would do much of that, but I prefer, and I think from the seminar there was quite a groundswell of opinion that the word respect should be maintained. So if we've dealt with number 1, we'll go on to number 2, treating council employees and representatives of partner organisations and those volunteering for the councils with civility and respecting the role that they play. Well, does anybody strongly disagree with the fact that we should treat council employees and other people we come across professionally well? I think we'll take that as to a great extent. Kim? Question 3, not bullying or harassing any person. Are there any views on this? Let's do it slightly differently. Are there any views on this one? I asked that because in my or the note I put down was, we need to allow for robust political exchanges. We are a council, it is political, and occasionally things, in the heat of the moment, things get said, and there does need to be a separation between that and bullying and harassing. Nevertheless, bullying and harassing is obviously not something we wish to condone. I'm sorry, I've lost track of the Councillor Walsh, I think, wished to speak.
Thank you. Yes, I think I agree with your point about you know, we're all grown-ups, and if we put our head above the parapet, we can expect some robust political comments, and should be able to, you know, if you can't stand the heat, maybe you shouldn't be in the kitchen. But I think there's quite a difference between bullying or harassment. That's where you're possibly trying to be unduly emotional, intimidate or silence somebody. And this is quite an important one to me based on experience elsewhere and generally, not just personally. So I think it's well worded, and there is a definition as has been alluded to. So I think we should support this one to a great extent.
I did actually. Thank you very much, Councillor Walsh. I wasn't, and I'm sure you all will appreciate, I wasn't trying to minimize the importance of this issue, just pointing out that it is quite a short, just 6 words there. I did actually look up the Equality Act 2010, and harassment is unwanted conduct related to a protected characteristic under the Equality Act that has the purpose of violating a person's dignity or creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment for that person. And bullying is not defined in UK employment law, but ACAS describes it as workplace bullying as offensive, intimidating, malicious, or insulting behavior. So similar to the harassment. Would anybody disagree to us saying to a great extent? No? Right, that's what we'll do. Kim, please. Can you raise the, sorry, not compromising. So question 4, not compromising or attempting to compromise the impartiality of anyone who works for or on behalf of the council. Are there any disagreements to marking this as to a great extent? Or any comments? Thank you very much, members. So we'll move on to number 5. So that is to a great extent, number 4. Number 5, not disclosing information given to us or me in confidence, or disclosing information acquired by me, which I believe is of confidential nature, unless I've received the consent of a person authorized to give it, or am required by law to do so. To me, this would appear again, to a great extent. Are there any comments or disagreements with that view? Right. We'll take that as to a great extent for number 5. Number 6, not preventing anyone getting information they are entitled to by law. Not preventing anyone. Are there any is there any disagreement to, again, a great extent, or are there any comments that members would like to make? No? Fine. Number 6 is to a great extent then. Number 7, not bringing my role or counsel into disrepute. Once again, does this seem to members to be a given that it should be to a great extent, that we do not wish to have either of those situations? And any comments? No? Everybody's still awake, are they? So number 7, Kim, that will be to a great extent. And finally on this in this question number 8, not using or attempting to use my position improperly to the advantage or disadvantage of myself or anyone else. I don't know why we'd want to do it to the disadvantage of myself, but I think we get the picture. I think this again sounds like to a great extent. Any disagreement to that? And any comments? Right, thank you, members. Well, we'll take that as to a great extent. So we've done that for all of the 8. Question 5. If you would like to propose additional alternative obligations or would like to provide more comment on a specific obligation, please do so here. We have 2 comments on member feedback. One of them was to include "and respect," and also a need to allow for robust political exchanges. And Councillor Walsh would like to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of points, but I'll do them one at a time, if I may. And I don't want anybody to assume that they're particularly based on Braintree experience. I've had experience in this area with other organisations, and I put these forward as constructive additional suggestions, which I think follow the spirit of the LGA code and perhaps could be seen as a useful extension of it. So the first one is, if there is evidence of a clear and consistent pattern of repeated complaints against any individual councillor, then consideration should be given by the council to temporarily suspending that councillor while the matter is investigated.
Okay. I think that is actually addressed further on, the question of suspension anyway, but what is your second point, Councillor?
It's not entirely dissimilar, and again, I think it follows the spirit of the draft code, but you guys will decide that. If there is significant evidence of an overall or corporate culture of bullying or harassment or other breach of the principles of public life, brackets the Nolan principles, in any council, then consideration should be given to it being investigated by an independent body external to the council in question. Were that to happen, and if the council was seen to be one side of a complaint or a dispute, there can be merit, or there is merit, in having it looked at externally.
Right, thank you very much. I think Kim has taken note of those. Are there any comments? Thank you very much, Councillor Walsh. If you've finished. Do any other members have any other comments or wish to make any comment on Councillor Walsh? No? Well, I think we'll move on then to question 6. Would you prefer to see the obligations as a long list followed by the guidance, or as it is set out in the current draft with the guidance after each obligation? I think the member feedback was each specific obligation followed by its relative guidance. Do any members have any comments on this? No? As a list, or each specific obligation followed by its relative guidance? Would people just like to put in chat what their... Yes, thank you, Councillor Euston.
Chairman, if I may.
Yes.
In relation to this one, it's important to remember that the code is also used by members of the public to look at and refer to. So my personal input on this part is it would be easier for the members of the public to read it, having had the obligation followed by the guidance immediately set out underneath it. I think if you ask members of the public to keep jumping backwards and forwards in documents, they will become quite disorientated in the document itself, and that would go against what the LGA is trying to achieve in simplifying.
That seems like a very good point. Thank you very much, Kim. And it's one which I would agree with. Are there any disagreements with that view, which is being offered by a professional in this area? That we'd prefer to see the obligations with each specific obligation followed by its relevant guidance. Are there any strong disagreements or disagreements with that? I'll take that as a no, and we'll move on to the next question. Question 7, if you'd like to suggest an alternative phrase that captures the same meaning or would like to provide a comment on this concept, please do so here. Well, oh, sorry, question 7, my apologies. To what extent do you think the concept of acting with civility is sufficiently clear? Do our members feeling that it is to a great extent sufficiently clear? I'll kick this off, and I said to a moderate extent when I completed this this form, and though one other member who filled out the form said they felt that acting with civility is very clear. Any comments, members? Yes, Councillor Usen.
Thank you, Chair. I think the problem is with people's perception of acting with civility. We all of us will probably have a general view of what's being civil and what isn't, but it's when you get down to the nitty-gritty, if you like, where differences can creep in. And so I think that is a sufficient area of lack of clarity to reduce it to a moderate extent.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. And Councillor Walsh.
I agree with what the chair said earlier. I think civility is not so clear. I think it's rather old school. Can we be slightly radical and suggest acting with civility and respect? If that was in the wording, it's clear to a great extent. Otherwise, I'd say it's only clear to a moderate extent.
Right. Thank you very much, Councillor Walsh. Are there any further comments? I'm sensing that, and please disagree if you will, that if we put to a moderate extent that we think the concept of acting with civility is sufficiently clear, and then in question 7A, myself and Councillor Walsh have suggested civility and respect. Any disagreement with that? I'll take that as a no.
Happy to capture those.
Thank you very much. Question 8. To what extent do you think the concept of bringing the council into disrepute is sufficiently clear? Any views on this, members? If not, I'll throw something in. My feeling is that we should all be able to understand what bringing the council into disrepute means, in that we should know what bringing ourselves into disrepute is, if that makes any sense. I wouldn't suggest that there's anything specifically strange about a council as distinct from a company or a family or a country. So but I'm still would say to a moderate extent. That is my view. If there are any other comments, please go ahead. Is that accepted, or is there any other views that we put to a moderate extent? All right. Fine. Kim?
Yep, happy to capture that.
Thank you very
Given
much.
that we've put that there's to a moderate extent, are members suggesting that a definition of what that means as a concept would be beneficial to the code? Is that something that you would like me to capture under 8A?
If members have any comments, we can do that. So could you go back to 9A, please, Emma? Thank you. Sorry, 8A.
8A.
Do we have any views on an alternative phrase?
Okay.
I don't know that we necessarily have to, but no. If not, then I think we'll. And I don't see any requests to speak or comment, so I think we'll go on to 9 then.
I'm grateful, thank you.
To what extent do you support the definition of bullying and harassment used in the code in a local government context? Any comments, members? Right, I will comment again, or begin again, and I put down moderate extent, and I added for 9A, for other definitions or additions, I did repeat what I'd said before about robust political exchanges. That may not help us move ahead, but that's what I felt. Are there any other comments?
Chairman, Councillor Walsh has indicated.
Thank you very much. Councillor Walsh.
Thanks again. It's just an information point, because earlier on, Chair, you very helpfully quoted definitions of bullying and harassment. And if I remember correctly, they were from other places. Can somebody remind me the nub of the definition of bullying and harassment in this document?
It's it was the Equality Act 2010. I'm looking at Kim here. Yes.
Yep. So the definitions that were read out are the definitions that's captured within the new code. From my perspective, where we do have complaints around bullying, particularly, it would be helpful in dealing with those particular complaints to have the definition within the code, because it's always quite difficult to draw in definitions that sit outside in other areas, and it becomes very clear then for the members of the public who are bringing an allegation on that particular aspect what behaviour would fall within that concept. So having the definition, I think, is a good move within the code.
All right. So thank you very much, Kim. So going back to the question, we need to give an answer here. To what extent do you support the definition of bullying and harassment used in the code in the local government context? And again, that is from the Equality Act 2010, which is, I guess, law. So do we support this to a great extent, or or not, members? Are there any disagreements with that? I think we'll go with that then to a great extent, Kim.
Thank you.
And I would just like the question of robust, well, personally, robust political exchanges. If anybody disagrees that that should be included, please make your point now. All right, so we'll go on to social media. Question 10, is there sufficient reference to the use of social media?
Chairman, from an operational aspect, we are getting more and more complaints around postings being made by members of the public, not members of the public, members of the council, and I think it's not specifically a problem for Braintree, but across local authorities, as we're relying more and more on social media as forms of communication, particularly during the lockdown period. Those have escalated, so it is an area that we are having to look at more and more. Whilst the code at the moment does mention it in passing, there's no explicit intention to include it or pull it in on all aspects. And I would like a steer from members as to whether there would be a need to have a more explicit part of the code around what is expected in terms of members' postings on social media and Facebook forums and the like, and Twitter, obviously.
Thank you very much, Kim. That was very, I think, very astute and very relevant. I myself had put down, no, there was not sufficient reference to the use of social media. And certainly what Kim has just said here, I think backs that up. Are there any members who disagree that they're sorry, let me phrase this properly. Are there any members who disagree that there should be more reference to the use of social media in the Code of Conduct? Or indeed any further comments? No?
Chairman, Councillor Euston has indicated, please.
Thank you. I did see that he made a comment. Oh, comment, please. My apologies, Councillor Euston. Please go ahead.
That's okay. Yeah, having been on the receiving end of some unpleasant social media stuff, I now don't use it at all. And I think it is far too easy for people to make offensive, bullying, harassing, whatever you want to say, comments on social media without any sanction. And I think from going back to how we should be behaving as councillors, I think the social media has to be covered by the same rules, where, you know, if you wouldn't say it in a council meeting, you shouldn't be saying it on social media. And so I don't think that there is enough in the overall Code of Conduct about social media, but then I don't think there's enough control over social media anyway. So I will admit to being biased against it because of personal experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Euston. It's unfortunate you've felt you had to put it that way, and I sympathise. We all do. So I think the overall view, Kim, is we can say no, there's not sufficient reference to the use of social media, and indeed it should be quite significantly part of this, because the conduct does, in a sense, work both ways. So, right, thank you very much. Question 10A, could we lift it up the page, please? Emma, thank you. So question, well, here we have some questions, specific ones. Should social media be covered in a separate code or integrated into the overall code of conduct? So we have the choice of separate code, integrated into the code, don't know, prefer not to say. Any views, members, on this? My view is I don't think it really matters as long as it's in there and easily understood. But
Chairman, if
yes.
Sorry, from an officer's perspective, as Kim's already referred to, having a single document with the obligations and the explanations beneath, it would make sense to have the code of conduct covering all aspects. So if we are dealing with members of the public, we're signposting them to one document, one source, as opposed to a variety of documents. I think there's also a risk that if we have two documents, one may get left behind in any sort of updates or any changes. So, but as we're very keen to have a single source, so the public are fully aware, because there's nothing worse than having to tell a member of the public that they need to look at another document. So from an officer's perspective, working with this, I would ask members to consider about having it incorporated into one document.
Thank you very much, Emma. Very well put. And I think, yes, that sounds eminently sensible. I have a few comments. I think Councillor Wall, was it Councillor Walsh?
It was, Chairman.
Yes. Please go ahead, Councillor.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I strongly endorse what Emma said and won't repeat it. I think it's very efficient to have it in one place. And going back to what my colleague Councillor Euston said, I also don't use social media very much, but it's, in a way, if any member, and I suspect this has probably happened to several of us, if you've been abused on social media, there's a tendency to withdraw. But that is a reduction, in a way, of one's democratic rights. And it's different to robust political exchange. So this is the direction of the future, whether we like it or not. So I think it's better, it should be integrated. And we didn't cover it under the last one, sorry, but have we been asked somewhere in this to say, because I think we thought there should be more attention given to social media. Have we been asked to say, to give examples of such?
Jim, I don't believe so, but
no, Chairman, I can step in. It's covered under, I suppose, question 10, where we're asked whether there's sufficient reference to social media throughout the document. It is captured, I think, in one place early on within the code. But if there are ever areas that you think it needs to be more explicit, obviously do let me know, and I can capture that in our response onto 10B.
Right, thank you very much, Kim. Councillor Mann wished to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I agree that it is not well covered in the model that's before us. There definitely needs to be much more, I think, on social media. Also agree that it should be integrated and not a separate document at all, for the reasons that have been well covered. I have never really engaged in social media myself, but as a member of the planning committee have been abused on numerous occasions, so I'm told. When I've sought advice from the council before as to how to counter this, they've told me simply not to reply. That was the legal advice that I was given, and not to get into a robust debate on social media. Is that still likely to be the current advice that might come out of a document such as this?
Chairman, happy to come in.
Please, Kim, yes.
I think in true legal term, it depends on the nature of the initial response. What we try to do in guiding members is to try and get them to avoid getting into a tit for tat conversation on social media, because it is very easy to get into that to-in and fro-in on a quick pace, and we find that sometimes that conversation can escalate quite quickly. So what my advice is normally is that, you know, step back, pause, and come back and reflect on it before you put a response on, if at all. Not in all cases is it necessary to respond, because it just continues to perpetuate the situation. But it does depend, unfortunately, on what the conversation is about and the nature of that conversation. And yeah, it's always better to pause sometimes and reflect before responding. It just helps sometimes take the heat out of it where necessary, but we will reflect and we'll provide guidance in circumstances as they arise.
Chairman, and if I may also just add to
Please.
Kim's comments, is that historically when we've had complaints regarding posts on social media, quite often it's not been members who've been responding to comments, it's when members have made comments on their own volition. So they've been the initiators of conversations, dialogue through social media, and they've done it in thinking that they are being a private citizen, but then they've gone on to use context which clearly puts them in a counsellor capacity. So like for the information that they're using, or that they've signed it off in a particular way. So I understand the context which Councillor Mann has given, but quite often for the code, in my experience here, it's where we've had members who've set out the conversation, started that conversation, and it's not been clear to those observing that conversation whether that individual has been a private citizen or an elected member. So that's where the majority of our complaint inquiries have come from. Now, sometimes it is quite clear that you've got somebody acting in a private capacity, but it's always been a very difficult area for us to work with, because the way that people take social media accounts on, because you can be an individual with a social media profile as an employee of somebody, or as a private citizen, or as an elected member. So the code, in my experience, has been mainly about those initiating conversations where maybe a member hasn't thought their conversations through before posting it to the world at large. So generally it's not about defending what you might have been engaged with, or an attempt to defend what you've been engaged in, but normally it's the initiating conversations.
Thank you very much, Emma. This is obviously gets more and more of a minefield as we get into it. Are there any other views on social media, or that we could put in 10B? If you'd like to make any comments or suggestion about how the use of social media is covered in the code, please do so here. One of our colleagues said a lot of differing views on the use of social media. Some people thought the code of conduct should not need to apply to a private Facebook page, but personally, I'm very aware of my public profile. You can never be sure when comments are going to appear in the public domain. Well, that is, I think, by being on Facebook, you are in the public domain. So are there any further useful comments that we can make, other than what I think the sense is that there needs to be a strong definition of how councillors should try and behave in this world of social media, if that makes any sense at all. Are there any further views? I'm conscious we're getting on with time and we have half of this still to do.
Got
And
Councillor Walters, Chairman, who's indicated.
thank you very much, Councillor Walters.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Emma. Social media is a toxic world, very toxic world. And really, I try to always be very positive and very nice to people, even though I see some really vile comments on there. I don't get involved with any of it. But it is a toxic world. We have to be so careful. I've seen the damage it can do to people, and it's, you know, it really is a dangerous place. That's all I wanted to say, because I know what it's like. Okay,
Well,
thank you for Chairman.
That's certainly very powerful. Thank you, Councillor Walters.
Thank you.
I had a comment from Councillor Walsh on the chat here. I believe sorry, is this, Councillor Walsh, is this referring to what we're talking about now, or is this something else?
Sorry, no, it was referring to the previous item, but
Okay.
Kim has answered it, so that's fine. Thank you very much.
All right. While I'm conscious that the social media issue, I think it's come out this afternoon that it is really something we need to think about more, and perhaps it's something we should talk about more in the council generally. And I'll talk to some people about this. But if everybody's okay, then we'll move on from this question and go to number 11. That is talking about interests now, pecuniary and other interests. To what extent do you support the code going beyond the current requirement to declare interests of the councillor and their partner? I wonder if I could just ask Kim, can you clarify what is this sort of 25 or 50 pounds, or is it something more fundamental than that, going beyond the current requirement?
So this is your declaration of interest under
Yes.
your pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest. So this is where you have land, business interests, and the like. Currently, the code requires you to make a declaration if it applies to yourself or to your partner. What the new proposals set out is that that extends to associates and other family members.
Yeah.
Now, the draft code is silent on what would be categorised within those two new terms, other family members and associates. And I think the table in question 13 looks to provide some additional categories around what that might or may not include. I suppose that there is always the risk that extending it too far to include all extended family members is probably a step too far. But for those who live in a household with other family members outside of their partner, then their members might feel that there is a benefit to including that extension within their declarations, because there is that close working with those additional members. But it's a conversational starter. And open to views from members on the committee.
Well, I suppose you could also have your brother living next door, but is that any different from him living down the hall? But any members, any comments on this? What do you? Thank you very much, Kim. That clarified it. The facts of associates and friends, and indeed family members, not that close, included in the code. To what extent does anybody support this? To a great extent? To a moderate extent? I don't hear much feedback, which is okay. And then
think
to a small extent, yes?
Chairman, I think there was 2 indicating for a moderate extent, Councillor Walters and Councillor Euston.
Okay, because they don't come up on mine. That's why I'm...
No, that's fine. They indicated by way of hands. I was just looking at the screens.
Okay.
just to assist.
I'm sorry. So could you repeat that then?
So Councillor Walters and Councillor Euston both indicated preference to moderate extent.
Moderate extent. And Councillor Wallace suggested on chat, I think it's fine as it is. And that is my view as well. So that's 2 and 2, I think. Any further, Councillor Walsh or Councillor Mann?
Thank you. I don't have particularly strong views, but I can envisage a situation where a member could use extended members of their family if they had nefarious objectives or wanted to accept hospitality beyond the limits. I know it shouldn't go too far, but I can see the sense behind this.
Okay. So what would your answer be there of those 5 then? To what extent do you support the code going beyond the current requirement?
Sorry, I hadn't answered the question, had I? I'd say, therefore, to a great extent.
Oh, so you support it. Well, that would imply perhaps friends and associates.
Sorry, I was taking it within the context of what I think, was it Kim or Emma said,
Right.
Other family members and associates.
Chairman, if it would help to give an example, at the moment, members are required on their register of interest to declare those interests that relate to them and their spouse or somebody who's living with them as what their spouse is.
Yeah.
What this appears to be doing is to extend that. But at the moment, just to remind members that when you go into a committee meeting, and it's easy if I can use planning as an example, if your son was applying for plan permission, you would have to declare an interest in that item, not because it's on your register of interest, it's because of how the other interests arises. So I think it's to seek clarity around that. So at the moment, your register of interest really just deals with the people who live in your household together. For some reason, when the declaration of interest form was produced 8 years ago, they only envisaged that there'd be a husband and wife or cohabitees, not expecting that there'd be people within that household who are also capable of holding property and having interests. So when that came in, we wasn't certain why they didn't include other members of the household. So for the register of interest form, I think it's probably worth members thinking that should the register of interest form, which all members are obliged to complete, whether that should extend to those currently living in the household at the time that form is completed. So that could be children, because not every child is under the age of 18, children stay at home longer and longer. It could be other family members, because it's not unusual for, extended families to live together. But of course, when you go into a meeting, and as I said, with planning committee, if your son who didn't live with you was applying for planning permission, our advice to you is that you have to need to declare an interest, because you have got such a close association with the applicant. It would be very difficult for you to say that you're not biased towards the applicant. So there's 2 aspects here: one, the register of interest form, and those interests that you have to declare at meetings. But I think generally members in meetings do declare very, very broadly. So it could be somebody they have a close association with. It could be that they're somebody that they actually related to, or somebody who they've got publicly known ties to. So I think if you look in the context of this, of the register of interest form being one aspect, and the declarations that you need to make at a meeting immediately as being the other aspect to this. So for being an officer who works with your registrations, I personally would like to see it extended to all people within the household at the time of the registration are completed, because it makes things an awful lot clearer. But our rules and declarations here at Braintree are used by members that they are very transparent and declare those nature relationships going forward. So there's no ambiguity as to how a member may be connected to, let's say, an applicant for planning permission. Does that help members?
It helps me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. If we were minded to accept the suggestion of Emma, that to me would mean that we would support the code going beyond the current requirement to a small extent, in that relatively few households, I would suggest, in Braintree district have another person other than the one or two adults who would be involved, and we could, I guess we could make the comment about that. I was thinking more of this question of friends and associates, which personally troubles me, because I really don't know how you define a friend. An associate might be someone you have a financial arrangement with. Yes, that I can understand. Sorry, members, would anybody else like to speak? Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Emma. That was very helpful. I agree very much with you that it should now be household, but no further than that. The sort of register of interest to include those who live under your roof, however that is defined. But you're into minefield if you try and extend it to a family or a friendship group. So yeah, household fine. Now you quote, Emma, the good practice of planning, and I think that ought to be extended council-wide to all committees, where there's a close association, however defined, that might affect your objectivity in the matter under discussion. It should be declared. The old acid test. What does a member of the public think who knows of that association? So we've often said, the leader has often said that we tend to over declare in this authority. I think that's a good thing, and that we ought to try and, on all occasions, on all matters that are under discussion, is there something here that I ought to declare because I might be held in breach of objectivity because of association.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mann. Councillor Eusden, you wish to speak?
Yes, I do. I think Emma has covered it very well indeed and clarified where we are. I do support an extension of where we currently are, because I do think that there are opportunities for, shall we say, the less scrupulous person to manipulate the system. And I find it very difficult to, how would you define friends and associates with any degree of accuracy? So I think that going too far into that area should be avoided, just because of the problems it would cause. But it would seem to me that it's actually easier to fall back on the general code of how you as a councillor should behave. And if there is the slightest doubt, if we use the example of planning, if there's the slightest doubt that your association or knowledge of somebody could put you in a situation where you may be compromised, then it surely makes sense to remove yourself from suspicion. So, you know, my view would be if somebody puts in a planning application and I know that person, whether I know them well or not well, I would check with governance whether I should declare that and whether I should exclude if I was a member of the committee making a decision on that. And I just wonder, you know, the danger is that we go too far one way or not far enough the other way. So, you know, that's why I opted for the middle road, which was a medium extent or something. I think I can't remember the words now. Moderate extent. Yeah, because I just think that, you know, family members, I mean, I have brothers who live all over the country. So fortunately, none of them live anywhere near Braintree. So can't actually create an interest problem for me. But if you had brothers or sisters or whatever living within the district, and, you know, let's say they were in a development company, you know, the opportunity for suspicion would be huge, especially with the passion that's held with planning applications. So I just think we need to strengthen it a bit, but not go too far. So hence moderate.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Councillor Euston. Thank you. Are there any other comments? If not, I was just going to sum up and say or suggest that we agree to Emma's suggestion that it be the household that is the area for declaring interest, and that would be to a moderate extent. Are members minded to accept that suggestion? If not, please make your presence known. Right, and we'll take that as agreed. And I'm going to suggest if any officers wish to halt proceedings for a minute or two, that's for a break. No? Okay.
Grateful, Chairman, but happy to continue.
Fine. Right, question 12. Should the requirement to declare interest be in the main body of the code or in the appendix where the draft model code currently references it?
So, Chairman, this is similar to the previous conversation where we had around the obligation followed by the guidance. So
Yep.
As the code is currently drafted, you have a short paragraph around what the interests would be, but the actual detail of what you're required to declare sits in an appendix.
Right.
So again, it's asking whether those should be merged into the main body of the document or not.
And I get the sense that officers would prefer it all to be in one document.
I didn't mean for that to come across as strongly, but yes.
It's all right.
It would make sense, and from a member of the public perception, it's easier to have it there in the paragraph that you're reading rather than to-ing and fro-in throughout it.
I have comments from Councillor Walsh saying main body. Well, he's done it to everyone. And Councillor Euston, main body of code. I would agree with that. Are there any disagreements that it be in the main body of the code? No. So that's question 12. That's straightforward, Kim.
No problem.
And 12A, if you wish to make any comments, I don't think it's really necessary. 13. To what extent do you support the inclusion of these additional categories for registration? All right, question 1. Any organization, association, society or party which you're a member or in a position of general control or management. If I may ask the officers, these aren't really additional categories, are they? I mean, these are the sort of things we had to put down anyway.
These are currently all in your current registers of interest, so they may be worded slightly differently
Yes.
or broken down into 4 sections, but these are essentially what's in your code now, in your register of interest now.
Okay.
So these are all familiar questions for you.
Are there any, before we get into the individual ones, does anybody have any comments they'd like to make, overall comments? The one I had was on number 4, any organization, society or party of whose principal purposes include the influence of public opinion or policy. No, sorry, no, it would be the next one. Any organization, association, society or party directed to charitable purposes not appointed by the council. Sorry, that was my wording, not appointed by council. Would that be the case? So if you are a member of a charity at this moment, you need to, I'm looking at the officers now.
If you are a ordinary member of a charity, so if I can use the WWF as an example, that is a charity for wildlife funding. If you are an ordinary member who pays an ordinary subscription, then you don't need to declare it. But if you then are up in the hierarchy, where you are influential on the movement of that organisation, then that's where we would say to members that you should declare that interest. But members do traditionally over declare, so you'll see on some members' registrations that they're a member of the AA, various local charities like the Essex Wildlife Trust, that kind of thing. So members have traditionally over declared because they just want to be transparent as to what their interests may be, mainly because this organisation, in common with others, do give grants to a broad sector out there, not just directly from council, but also through the council grant schemes and things like that. So the first box is where the council's actually appointed you to that body. So we have that in our register at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I mean, my feeling is that we should just leave it as to a great extent for all of them. Do members have any disagreement with that? No? Right. We'll move on to, well, 13A is comments. I don't think we want to make any comments there. Question 14, to what extent do you support the proposed requirement the council do not accept significant gifts as set out in obligation 11? Is there any disagreement to a great extent that we do support not accepting significant gifts? Any comments, members? I think not. We did have one comment, member feedback. Oh, I think it was me, actually. Significant gifts needs to be specified. Integrate obligation 12 into obligation 11. The significant gifts, was there a figure mentioned?
So they've broken this down into 2 questions. So the question that we're looking at the moment is whether significant gifts, which isn't defined within the Act, or within the code, sorry. The code goes on to say that there is a threshold for registering any gift over £25. So I agreed whether you want to link the two. So a significant gift is anything over 25, or whether you want to
Well, that
whether
made
there's a
sense to
need
me
for
when I wrote it
over and
down
above.
2 weeks ago. So I think if it makes sense to Kim and it makes sense to members, then we'll put that in as a comment. I think we can move on to 15 then. Question 15. The draft code proposes £25 as the threshold for registering gifts and hospitality. Is this an appropriate threshold? I suppose, and somewhere I think I read there was the question of inflation, but there is no inflation at the moment. So I don't think £25 will be £25 for a little while. Is this the appropriate threshold? So either yes, or it should be reviewed annually with the codes review. No, it should be lower. Any views, members?
You've got Councillor Houston, who's indicated chairman, please.
Thank you very much, Councillor Eusden.
Hi, it's currently £50 in our code, I believe, and I don't really see any reason to reduce that, because I know at the moment there's no inflation, but you don't really get much for £25 now, nor did you, I think, when the limit was set at £50. So I don't really see a reason to reduce it. I think £50 is perfectly adequate.
Chairman, if I can just give some context, because I
Yeah.
regularly update members' interests. In terms of historic gifts that members have received, they've not actually been gifts that members have been able to quantify a value, because when you're given a gift, somebody doesn't hand it over and say, oh, by the way, this is worth £25. The way that I've looked at it is, if you know the value of a gift because it's obvious, then it's easy for you to determine. If you're uncertain, then my advice is it's best to over-declare. And really, you have to remember, what does £25 mean to somebody? I accept what Councillor Houston says, you know, £25 doesn't buy a lot. But if a member of the public was to hand a bottle of wine over to you, what would that look like to the observing members of the public? Because they don't know if that's a £25 bottle of wine. They don't know if it's a £125 bottle of wine. It's the same as a bouquet of flowers. So it's been the culture here for members to just declare to me any gifts, and I've routinely put that on their register of interest, because it's about the transparency of receiving something from a third party.
Yes.
We also do put on where they've come from, so it's clear if it's come from a developer or it's come from a grateful member constituents, because the work that's been done on their behalf. But it has been very hard historically for members to put a value on the gifts they have received, because they are not aware of how much sometimes these things cost. I mean, for an example, if you were to buy a bouquet of flowers for £25, you really wouldn't get a lot for your money, because that's just the way things are. So personally, I don't think it matters what figure you put on it, because it's going to be difficult for members to gauge that. And with the culture that we've had so far to over declare, I think some members will just be keen to have any gift declared on their register, because members routinely here don't get gifts, to my knowledge. I know when members have been on conferences and they've been given pens, packs of paper, that kind of thing as part of your conference attendance, we wouldn't regard that as a gift. But if, you know, if a constituent has thanked you for something and they've given you a box of chocolates, members have asked those previous to be on their registers, because they just want the world at large to know that they are open and transparent. Because somebody may say, well, you did them a favour, you got a box of chocolates, what will you do for me if I give you an elephant? You know, I know it's a silly example, but they're the sort of things that do come across our desks occasionally.
Thank you once more, Emma, for bringing us up to speed on that. So we're saying at the moment, and indeed for some time, it's been £50 has been the limit. Gifts are not regularly given or accepted. We don't, the view can be taken, and there is this issue of over declaring. of something that you don't even know what it costs. On that basis, then we could just leave the suggestion might be to leave the £50 limit as it is. Are any councillors, any members actively, other than Councillor Euston, opposed to this? Or are there any other views? I'm going to suggest then that we leave it at £50. You have 10 seconds to disagree, and then we can move on. And should it be reviewed? Well, the other issue is should it be reviewed annually? I think, as my view is, as part of the entire review, why not? You know, you'd look at anything else. So I would suggest that. Again, if members disagree, please indicate. Fine, thank you. Question 16, the LGA will be producing accompanying guidance to the code. Which of the following types of guidance would you find most useful? Please rank 1 to 5, with 1 being the most useful. Oh, this is the last question.
It is, Chairman.
So, how should we best do this? Would anybody like to speak on this? Put their head above the parapet.
If not, Chairman, you have a member feedback in the order that they have indicated. Perhaps that might be a good starting point for a discussion on whether that indication is in line with members of the committee's views.
Yes. I think that was me, but
okay.
So I said that number 1, the most useful, would be explanatory guidance on the code. And then number 2, case studies and examples of good practice. So after each, section. And then number 3, regularly updated examples of case law. Number 4, supplementary guidance that focuses on specific areas, well, social media. And then 5, the least important, improvement support materials such as training and e-learning packages. I mean, personally, I think that would always be number 5 in terms of a code document. But what do members feel about that? Don't all speak at once. If
Chairman, there's a couple of thumbs up, so I'm assuming general consensus for that proposal.
Right. So we'll go with my suggestion then. Thank you very much. So that brings us amazingly to the end of that questionnaire. Thank you very much, members and officers. I think you've done very, very well. And it takes us swiftly on to item 6. So I'm sorry, just to finish off on this. So we are agreed that, yes, this will be part of the formal response by Kim to the consultation closing on Monday. Right. We move on to item 6, which is the Code of Conduct Complaint Procedure. Further to the guidance we received on Friday, members, this report is a verbal report by Kim Cole, Head of Governance and Monitoring Officer. Kim, can you please proceed with your report?
Absolutely, and I'll keep it brief. I'm sure members are at the end now. So in terms of the code of conduct, I had hoped to bring a revised policy document to you for your consideration. I wasn't quite able to do that, but what I'll do is I'll just set out some of the process around some of the thoughts with the code of conduct complaints that we're dealing with at the moment. So coming into the council and what now 4 months in, and looking at some of the governance issues, kind of from a start to finish process really. And one of those considerations is looking at the code of conduct complaints. Now currently there are 4 documents that relate to how the council handle code of conduct complaints. There's a flow chart, there's an assessment criteria, there's a process document, and there's also a complaints form. Now, to me, there seemed to be some merit in revisiting those documents to make, perhaps as we've had a conversation around some of the answers to the questions on the item before, is to draw them all into one place so that we're not referring to different documents, to make it an easier process to understand for members of the public, and so that it clearly sets out a start to finish process around how we will deal with complaints, at what point we will engage with the independent person, and at what point in time decisions will be made, setting around some timescales and things. A number of the complaints that we get seem to escalate because the person bringing the complaint isn't aware of the process. So what they perceive as a delay isn't necessarily a delay, but because they've got nothing to refer to or no expectations around how things are handled, it just brings in another element to the complaint itself. So if they get frustrated with the complaint process, they're frustrated around the complaint itself, and it just starts to become quite a difficult area to manage. So what I will do for the next meeting is I will bring that policy document to you, which is all 4 documents brought into one place, and just expands on some of the process around how we will deal with it, and to help us manage members of the public expectations and members of the council's expectations if and when they bring a complaint against another. So apologies, it's not with you today, but it will be with you on your next meeting in October.
Thank you very much, Kim. Are there any members wish to make any comments to speak on this item? If I could just ask, would this be a common, how can I put it, having one document, would that be more common in other local authorities?
It is, Chairman. I've looked at our neighbouring authorities and drawn on probably 2 that are all in one document that sets out the start to finish process, and it's a much easier document to navigate rather than keep referring or providing additional copies of further referred to documentation to members of the public as you navigate through the process. So it is a standardised approach that's seen in neighbouring authorities.
Well, that sounds quite sensible, and we can and perhaps reduce the amount of verbiage involved. Any further comments, councillors? Councillor Walsh.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Emma. Very crisp as usual. And it certainly sounds the right way to go. I was trying to write down as you were speaking, what was the 3rd document? There's the flowchart, assessment criteria, and the form, but there's one other that you're going to...
A process document.
Okay. Seems a very good idea. And I guess we'll probably have that well before the next committee in October, isn't it?
You will do.
Thank you.
Chairman, there's also Councillor Johnson's indicating.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. The current, as I understand, and in fact acknowledge, the current system is very, very slow. It seems to be extremely laborious. From my point of view, there seems to be no feedback from anybody involved in it. It's incredibly slow. Is there any way we could speed things up, do you think, in general in the future? I don't know what the delays are. And I've always been puzzled by the person involved in these procedures being completely anonymous, but I understand perhaps that's got to be the case. But for anybody bringing a complaint, and some members of the public are quite malicious in what they do and are looking for any opportunity to complain, I think it's not unreasonable for the person who's been complained against to be kept in the picture. Thank you.
No, absolutely, and part of that complaint process is building in that expectation. What we do have at the moment is there's a process of sifting before we get to that stage of informing members, just because we do get those that are malicious, a bit of tit for tat, or don't fall within the code itself. So we do a phenomenal amount of sifting before we get into the actual process itself around that. So members don't always get informed where there's been a raised a potential complaint against them, because we've dismissed it at a very early stage. Members are normally only informed if it gets into the realms of being part of that formal process.
Thank you very much, Kim. Are there any further comments on this item?
Chairman, could I just pick up the point that Councillor Johnson said about
Please.
the anonymity of complainants? Our current process doesn't actually provide anonymity to the complainants. In the process that currently sets out that the complainant will be identified to the complaint subject, it's only in very rare circumstances that anonymity is given. To my knowledge, I've worked under a number of MOs here. I can't recall a case where we have given anonymity, because normally it's preserved for the most serious of cases. But I do take on board Councillor Johnson's comments on that. But if the current forms which Kim is reviewing and will be pulling together are currently available on the council's website, so they are there if members would like to view those. And if it helps, if anybody wants to be signposted, I'm happy to signpost members to where they are if they just want to refresh themselves of what those documents are in advance of Kim showing you a new format and any sort of subsequent amendments that needs to be made as a part of that review.
Is it, thank you, Emma. Is it appropriate to ask more or less how many of these, I'll call them complicated complaints, we have in a year, or?
I don't know how many we have in a year, and that's just simply based on the fact that I've only been here 4 months, so I'm not aware of the annual picture.
All right.
Unfortunately, but I can certainly bring that back and circulate that to members outside of the meeting. Happy to do so.
Thank you very much. Right, if there are no further comments on that item, thank you again, Kim, for that, and we look forward to with eager anticipation to the document in a month or two. Members, I can confirm that we've concluded our business for this afternoon's meeting. Thank you very much for your patience and your contributions. I think it's been very worthwhile, and we'll look forward to at some stage in the future having a new code of conduct. I'll therefore close this meeting of the Corporate Governance Group at this time, and thank you, members, for your attendance and those watching the broadcast via the Council's YouTube channel. I'll now hand over to the meeting facilitator.
Thank you, Chairman. Before I ask the webcaster to terminate the broadcast, I would urge members to complete the short web-based meeting feedback survey that will be emailed to you shortly. This is very important to us to help improve our meetings. I would also like to remind you that the Council will retain performance data relating to your connection to the meeting in the event of a legal challenge to this new way of holding meetings. That brings us to a close, members. Thank you very much for bearing with us and attending this meeting. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your evenings, and thank you and good night.
Webcaster, if you could just confirm the meeting's been